research project was, first of all, should acknowledge it was financially funded by South Asian Network to Address Masculinity, Kathmandu, and it was carried out in 2012, so 12 and 13. Actually, when we think about the construction of masculinity or femininity, we generally think around the line of tradition, culture, and generally our purview is out of school, but we do know that the schools take a very active part in construction of masculinity. So it was the primary reason of taking this research project, as how do schools, particularly textbooks, construct masculinity, though the school's stated objective is for gender equality, obviously. But in practice, a lot of things are not go with that kind of notion. So in today's world, because the increased emphasis on education for all and universalization of education, more and more children are spending their time in school, and school became a very legitimate site and important and significant site for learning of masculinities. We can see school in a numerous way, like everyday interaction, pedagogy of teachers, and as well as school, as well as textbooks. So I have chosen this, how the courses of masculinities are interwoven or presented in the textbooks, and because it's a very solid kind of message which is there, and we can see the last year's textbooks as well as different boards of textbooks, and it is a site for like the state, because in the construction of textbooks there is a direct state intervention, so state's political ideology interferes in. So in the construction of femininity, the role of textbooks has been widely studied. Even for masculinity it has been studied, but not in Indian context. So we started with this research question: what kind of messages regarding regarding masculinities in textbooks are given? Is there any difference in message among textbooks followed at national and regional level? Because in India, education is in concurrent list, so a lot of provincial, state board of education have their own textbooks, and central board of schools follow a particular kind of textbooks, which is not exactly the same for the UP board or West Bengal board or say Maharashtra board. And how do the discourses of nationalism and masculinity are interwoven and presented in the textbook, and how the state's political ideology interferes. So discourse analysis in the social constructivist framework was followed, and after that, after the discourse analysis or the kind of thematic analysis of textbook, task-based interview of students was also done. I have chosen class 6 level students or class 6 textbooks. I have divided the textbooks in 3 categories or 3 sets, and the first set, those textbooks which are currently in use, which are the most recent textbooks based on the National Curriculum Framework Recommendation 2005, and it is being used at the national level or all the Central Board of Secondary Education schools. Set 2 textbooks were the previous textbooks based on the previous curriculum framework, which is not currently in use, but I have chosen this one to answer the research question number, that to assess the effect of political ideology on the textbook, the messages given in the textbook. So it is the previous curriculum framework textbook, and the third one was the provincial government of the Uttar Pradesh UP board textbook, and these were the numbers. These are the findings, like after the analysis of the textbooks, though we live in 21st century and we say that yes, we work for the peace and human rights, so on and so forth, but the most dominant themes which emerged from the textbooks were war and war heroes. Why the textbooks are so much concerned with these things will come later, and the militant nationalism, and I have seen it in 2 parts, like gender account of nation and the women in nationalist project, patriotism and positive masculinity. So war and warlike situations are best suited to depict the masculinity in its highest form, like bravery, sacrifice for nation, patriotism. these values were represented as the highest masculine value, or sometimes as a synonyms of human value. So if we want to depict these values, war and conflict situation are the most suited situation. So that's why the textbooks, whether it's a Hindi textbook, history textbooks were obviously dominated, but the Hindi and social studies textbooks, and sometimes it was a moral science textbooks used in UP government textbooks, tech board, but also war between God and demons, like mythological, war between nationalist revolutionary freedom fighters and British, war between Muslim rulers as the invaders and the native kings. So it's a lot of war, and war heroes were a kind of very dominant theme were there. And set 2 and set 3 textbooks were extensively have very thick and very in terms of quantity and quality, very thick messages regarding war heroes and war. All the 3 sets of textbooks have a poem on Queen Rani ki Jhansi ki Rani Lakshmibai, and she is a freedom fighter. She was a freedom fighter, and she fought for the nation. She fought Britishers, and she sacrificed her life. She was referred as a having manly quality of bravery, so she was referred as a Mardani every time in the poem. In all the textbooks, nationalism and masculinity was presented as a one and the same. Like there is no difference between these two, because the microculture of masculinity and the microculture of nationalism goes hand in hand. Like masculinity is about protection of the family, protecting one's women, folk, national pride and honor, and nationalism is also protecting mother nation. So India is always referred as a mother India, and I think most of the nations refer themselves as a she form, and in both of the cases we need some kind of enemy, because the idea of protection essentially involves an enemy, real enemy or a hypothetical enemy. So while fighting an enemy, the masculine ideals get its height or climax, and nationalism also gets its height and climax. So they sometimes bravery, patriotism, sacrifice are like these qualities sometimes are masculine qualities or nationalistic qualities. It's really difficult to find out the difference. The ideology of protection from personal level, like protecting one's family and women, it extends from personal level to public level, and it's a very dominant model of construction of masculinity. And that's why conflict zone was a very portrayal of women. In textbooks, women were portrayed, always nation was presented as a mother India and in a she form. Women portrayal was positive in 2 ways. It's a symbolic mother nation, with the source of all good qualities and this kind of, and sometimes as the actual mothers of brave, virile, patriotic sons. While negative portrayal, when we tried in set 2 and set 3 textbooks, when there was an effort to give our textbooks an indigenous look, we try to look to incorporate our folk tales, ancient Indian folk tales. So folk tales from Panchtantra to folk tales, 2 chapters were incorporated, and in both the folk tales, Indians women were represented as a selfish, impulsive or self-centered person. So it's really a dilemma, like when you try to give your textbooks indigenous look, and as well as you want to achieve some modern goals like gender equality. So it's a problem. Women, as I say, that the women were portrayed as the actual mothers of brave and virile and patriotic sons. Here are 2 excerpts from the book. 2 revolutionary freedom fighters. Women in nationalist project were portrayed through the personal accounts of 2 revolutionary Indian freedom fighters. And here are the you can see it. The second account is of the brave freedom fighter Bhagat Singh, and the first one is Ram Prasad Bismil. So both of them exhort women and motivate women to be a mother, to be ready to sacrifice their son's life, and they should not come in between son and his nation. They shouldn't come as a barrier. They should promote or they should facilitate this sacrificing act of. So that's in this way women were seen as an actual mother of the brave son. When the war was not the context in the textbooks, when the context is something else, like you can say that this non-conflict zone is there, still bravery is a very staple kind of quality of manhood. Like a boy is protecting in a flood situation, a boy is something like that. So, and kindness and benevolence are the other qualities. They just oppose it, like a very cruel, a very brave and very very cruel kind of king was very benevolent and very kind to his own subjects and very cruel to his enemies. So very conflicting kind of qualities were depicted in the same person or ruling class male. Like positive masculinity, when the war is not the context, here is some metaphors were used to incorporate the idea of like contempt for weakness and the celebration of bravery. Like here with the metaphor of bird is a poem, I have translated it, but the central theme is that a bird, you should fly forever, because if your wings are broken, you are tired, but you should not go back. If you go back, your friends will laugh at you, you will be ridiculed, and you will be celebrated and as a martyr if you sacrifice your life. So though it's the poem is a kind of non-war zone, but again the bravery and martyrdom is the same. So hegemonic masculinity, ruling class males were generally depicted. One interesting finding was there: the lower caste class men were feminized and the upper class caste women were presented in a masculine manner. Like Rani, Jhansi ki Rani, she was depicted as a Mardani or the manly quality. But one here is again Guru Gobind Singh, the text. Overt theme is sacrifice for nation, but the subtle theme is about the caste system also. But the whole text never questions about the hegemony of the class, like who can sacrifice for the nation, and it naturalizes it. Like, I'm ready to give my head, but will you accept my head because I'm from lower caste, dyer, one who dyes clothes. And the text just goes on. It just touches the theme of caste system in a very subtle manner, but never questions it. And it's like that. So depiction of masculinity depends on the social context. Masculinity is important, but other dimension of analysis like caste, class and religion is very important. So analysis of masculinity is important, but we should not exclude it. We should not analyze it in an exclusive manner. So with the study of masculinity is also the shifting nature of identity coupled with the other context. Set 2 and Set 3 textbooks were more, they have more explicit messages regarding masculinity in comparison to Set 1. But let me show you this example of Set 1 English textbook. It is currently in use. It is Class 6 English textbook. The obverse of the, though it is not a part of the textbook, but the obverse of the cover page is like to join Indian Army. It is an advertisement kind of thing, you can say. And 3 soldiers, male soldiers in full manly gait, and 1 female kind of thing with a computer. An extraordinary life, a life full of adventure, honor and glory. All these are qualities which goes with the manhood kind of way. So at Class 6 level, students don't join army. But why this advertisement is there at Class 6 English textbook? So my point is, we wonder that why our men is like the way they are. We bred aggression, we cultivate aggression from very young age, but the textbooks legitimize and justify the use of violence in the cover of patriotism or nationalism. We did some, I did some student interview. Like I asked, who is patriot? And the student said, who can sacrifice his life for nation? So who can fight for nation? So male soldiers in red it's my question and in black is the responses. Can women be patriot? So students say yes. Then how? Don't know. And after thinking, one male student, I was the last of interview, say, okay, women can be patriot while buying Indian-made goods or while nursing. So, I asked students, will you join army? One boy said yes, the other one said no, but he was very careful that, no, it's not like that, I'm afraid. My interest is different. So he added it, because no is not the enough response for him. So male students justified the violence in order to protect one nation, family and women folk. They have internalized this message. But girls will say that yes, it is important to protect one's nation and women's pride. It is important. And because male soldiers, they do this, and that's why they deserve respect. So they are the first grade citizens, males are the first grade citizens, and we are not as fully citizens as in the sense of male. So students, they have accepted gendered account of nation. At class 6 level, boys have very clear-cut idea of what is expected from them. To sacrifice their life, to be brave, to be patriot. But at class 6 level, women do not have very clear-cut idea, because they are expected to be mothers of very virile men. They are represented symbolically. So at class 6 level, they do not have very clear idea about what is expected in nationalist discourse from them, but men have. Students' agency, yes, students have agency. I asked them which chapter they liked, why did they like it. They have agency in terms of liking of the text and disliking of the text, but their agency is made limited through powerful discourse of nationalism and its demand, because it's really difficult, even at class 6 level, when the students are at 11 or 12 years old, to say that, oh no, I'm not brave, I'm afraid, I don't fight for nation, and this kind of thing. These are some more political ideology effects, because set 2 textbooks have more aggressive militant kind of masculinity in their textbooks in comparison to set 3 and 1. And not a single textbook have any kind of trace or depiction of alternative or subordinate kind of masculinity. Textbooks provide very fertile ground to inculcate hegemonic masculinity, which is aggressive, which is brutal, which is superior to femininity, but aggression was wrapped and disguised in a very subtle manner in the cover of patriotism and nationalistic demand. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Our next speaker is Rebecca, and she is Research Director, Institute of Reproductive Health, Georgetown University.
Good afternoon, everyone. Where is her? So thanks everyone for joining us after our wonderful lunch and all the whole morning presentations. I think it's safe to say that we're all here because we want to bring about more equitable gender relationships. Is that correct? We're all here for that. So I like to think that it's good to start by understanding how those gender inequitable relationships are formed and how those gender norms are formed. So what I'm going to do today is share some information or some experiences that we have and look at how Ugandan boys in a very particular cultural setting understand and experience their development into their masculine identity. So the information I'm going to share today comes from the GRACE project. That's the Gender Roles Equality Transformation Project, which is being conducted in northern Uganda in by a consortium which consists of the Institute for Reproductive Health, my organization, Pathfinder International, and Save the Children. So before I go further, I'd like to introduce my Save the Children colleagues who are here with me today. Maybe you could stand up. We've got Brad, Benin, and I think Dickens is here or is not here as a complimentary member of the great team. So I'm not going to talk much about the intervention. So after the presentation, if you're interested, they can share more with you. The funding for this project is from USAID, and you can see a little bit of the objectives. So starting here with this slide. So as the boys on this slide grow up, they're going to grow up into adolescence. The differences in their roles and those of their sisters and their friends are going to be become very much more marked, more differentiated. And they're going to start to put into practice, I guess you could call it hierarchies of power in their intimate relationships, which is why the GREAT Project, and I think many of us here really believe it's important to start as young as you can to get young boys and girls on a path to gender equity. We conducted interviews with 40 boys and girls during transitional phases of the life course to develop life histories. And the information I'm going to draw on today pulls from those life histories to give voice to some of those gendered experiences. Today, of course, I'm focusing on the boys. You could have a similar presentation just about the girls. And we also did 35 in-depth interviews with individuals that the young boys and girls identified as significant in their life as people who helped them to become ideal men and women, that taught them how to be men and women. So why a life course framework? We use a life course approach because these moments of transitions are really exciting opportunities for transformation. So that's why our whole project and also the research is shaped around these 4 moments of transition: very young adolescents, older adolescents, newly married, and new parents. So as you know, and we've talked about already quite a bit today, change is possible. Gender norms are not inevitable. They're constructed in an ongoing interaction between young people and their societies and the institutions within which they live. But puberty is a particularly critical time because that's the moment when boys and girls begin to assume adults' gender roles. So most of the young people that we interviewed really were looking forward to adulthood, and particularly because they knew in this setting that they would be respected. They would start to achieve the respect they desired, but they were also concerned, the boys especially, that they weren't really ready to assume some of these social responsibilities that they knew were coming. You can see a quote from one of the newlyweds, Paul, that he's doesn't feel really ready for those responsibilities. And the boys also recognize that puberty signals the expectation that they begin to act in even more gendered ways than they already are. So in the words of, these are all pseudonyms, of course, in the words of 14-year-old Peter, "Until now, my life has not been any different from girls' life. When girls are still young, they do everything that boys do. But now that we're growing up, that's when we all learn what we're really supposed to do." So, of course there are gender differences in children, but they're becoming much more marked as they grow up. So this slide shows a comparison of fears and concerns that young people talk about during puberty. And I think it really is a good representation of how gender is embodied on boys and girls during puberty and how that can result in very divergent expectations for them in their lives. And you see here clearly, I think, the influence of hegemonic masculinity, where men are viewed as predators, as providers, defined by their sexual prowess, and girls and women are more the passive victims of men's agency. So boys and girls, of course, they recognize these gender differences, and they also understand many of the mechanisms that are at play in teaching them how to be men and women. So this slide, this is my most theoretical slide, really. This is showing that gender enculturation really unrolls in a context in which the young people are interacting with different systems and those social actors. So these settings that you see on your left side, kinship, religious institutions, educational institutions, those are all basically the places or systems that are organized to reproduce gender differences. So many of you I know are familiar with Michael Kimmel's work. So one of his famous quotes is that, institutions are like factories, and what they produce is gender difference. So that's, in a way, what we're seeing here, and that I'm going to talk with you a little bit about. The second column shows the settings or the sites where this gender enculturation takes place. The hut, the clan meetings, the church, the school. So those are the places that we all need to be to help form and transform more equitable gender norms. Then the final column shows processes, all of the different processes that we pulled out of the data, the way that boys and girls are taught to be men and women. So instruction, advice giving, very important in the Ugandan setting, working together, discipline, violence, all processes. And of course the community at wide doesn't only discipline and shape their own children, but all of the children in the community, in part by directly helping to raise the children, but also because they can enforce gender norms. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from a discussion between a group of boys. Just these boys were really laughing a lot during this discussion. So let me read this. So for us in a trolley here, if you bring a wife and she stays for like 2 years and there's no sign of children, the wife will be chased away. So everyone laughs. There will be very many talks about my wife. The elders' eyes will be upon me. So if they wait in vain, my brother, there will be so many issues. You find when you want to go for a journey, your wife says, if you're going, I'm going with you. Things will be bad here behind for her. You will find that your family begins hating themselves over something you don't even understand. Their family members would think that she cannot produce a child, and God will not have wanted them to stay together. So I like that quote because it shows, shows how boys in a setting of reproduction also face a lot of pressure in an area where we usually only think of boys being the ones that are placing the pressure on their wife. So of course, there are many examples that came out of our research of men and boys who do resist these norms and do have more equitable pathways in their lives. This is an example, a quote from one of the significant others, an older man who's giving advice to younger men, and he's saying, you can stand up to your elders, you can tell them, about what your wishes are, and a lot of that discussion is framed in them advocating for their wives and making life better for their wives in this very tight-knit family structures that they're working within. So this slide, to close a little bit this section, it really shows how social systems, social settings, and processes all work together. So I'm going to read you a little quote from the life history of Jacob. He says, I spend my time studying and praying at the Catholic Church. After school, I love to play with my friends. I'm lucky that I'm a boy and I'm able to spend time with my friends. My father has been very important in teaching me and raising me to be a good man. My mother and older sister have also encouraged me to stay in school. My elder brothers are the ones I seek advice from. And then it goes on to talk about all the people in his life that is really shaping him. So, as I mentioned before, boys and girls recognize these mechanisms. And now I want to look a little bit at these individual processes. So boys and girls talk about how they learn to be men and women, and they talk a lot about learning by observing. So the girls are more expressive, and they use more words than boys do to explain all these, all these processes. But they both really focus on, what they see and observe around them, and how they learn that. So some young people also commented on the power of example. For example, girls talk about how it would be almost impossible for a boy who grew up observing their fathers drinking too much or beating their wives to behave differently when they become fathers themselves or husbands themselves. Okay, so in terms of learning by doing, so that's another mechanism. So they talk a lot about learning about gender by doing chores. Boys and girls learn to be men and women from a very early age, maybe 3 years old, carrying water, helping in the household, gradually mature and take on more and more responsibility. I think that's very similar in other settings. And they often talk about, really conflate gender work roles with gender in general. And the lesson that I take from that is that, division of labor is really a core piece of gender norms and gender roles. They, of course, also talk a good deal about sex and beginning to have sexual relationships and having sex as a key part of growing into your gender identity. So this boy, Joseph here, he had a girlfriend who was very focused on finishing school, but he also felt very pressured. And you can say here, he wanted to have sex, and it was really a rite of passage for him. He felt until he had sex, he wouldn't be seen as an adult. Boys also talk quite a bit about having children as a key transition into manhood. If you're not a father, you're not really an adult, and you can't be respected. So I'm going to read a quote from newly married Robert, who really dreams of being a father, and he shares those dreams. He says, when I'm among people, my maturity will be there. I will be able to sit among the clan members. If there are no children in the household, people minimize you, and no one will come to visit you. So another, they're showing how, reproduction and fatherhood is very important to the masculine role. So peers provide, of course, a lot of advice. They model behaviors and they enforce norms by reinforcing or sanctioning behavior. They're a very powerful influence because young people want to be accepted and they want to be approved by their peers. So this little excerpt from Opio it's quite a long story, but basically he gets a girlfriend. She really likes him. According to him, he kind of throws herself at him. She really wants to have sex. He's not sure. He talks to his aunt. She advises him not to, and he breaks it off. She gets angry because he talks to his aunt. They break it off, and then he loses all his friends because they say, why wouldn't you have sex with her? We don't want to be friends with you anymore because you're not telling the line, basically. So another force that is less obvious, perhaps, are the different ways that boys and girls occupy space and time. So gender, time, and space. Expectations, of course, differ from boys and girls. You all know that. We've mentioned it before. I've mentioned it before. Girls are expected to do a lot of chores at home, to stay at home, not to go outside, while boys have more opportunity for going outside the home and learning. All the boys and girls notice this, and this is one quote, where the boys are saying, oh, it's not all the same for the girls. He goes on to say that she has to do that because her mother is very tired and she needs to help her mother. So violence is an important role as well. So these gendered boundaries are often enforced by violence. The specter of violence keeps girls close to home often, in this particular area at least. They're afraid to venture to town, to play soccer, to go to school even. And it's all of the boys and girls mention violence as a major difference between boys and girls. So Simon saying, I would also be afraid of going to fetch water if I were a girl. Violence is used explicitly to reinforce gender norms. You can see an example here of a community leader who used violence, and it was effective in his setting. He used it, and his wife changed her behavior. So also, other forces shape gender, politics, and history. So there's a lot written about the conflict in northern Uganda and how it shaped gender norms. So I don't have time to go much into that. But basically, the gender roles changed when the communities were living in the displaced camps. Women took on a lot of non-traditional roles, and they see now that as women took on these roles, men withdrew, and a lot of differences in gender norms. And there's several panels on that, I think, of this. So what I wanted to talk for a second about is kinship structure, because that also has important influence. So as you know, this is a patrilineal society, and girls generally marry outside of their village into a new family, and that means that they no longer are really contributing economically to their natal family, and that has an influence on their status. An older man says, girls always have to work hard so that they are loved by their family. And this girl, newly married girl, Peace, says, if I were a boy, I would really be loved because my family would appreciate me. So by way of a conclusion, I'm going to talk just two slides about great. So recognizing these hidden influences, the power of gender norms, we set out to build on all of these life stories, to really amplify the voices of gender equity that we did find, to build on the pathways of resistance that we saw. And we developed a life course intervention, which has tailored yet complementary pieces of intervention for each age group. These are the different elements of the great intervention. You can see it tries to tackle every element of the ecological model. And really, it's not an information-based intervention. It's designed to facilitate critical reflection and to have that reflection diffused through social networks. And it was also designed to be feasible to scale up. So our hypothesis is to develop something that can be widely scaled up through existing groups. So more information about GREAT. You have my colleagues Save the Children. There's a lot on our website. And you can go to find out more about this project and all of the research results at our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. And if you would like to ask more about this project, you can talk to her later. Now I am inviting Padmini. She is a PhD student, School of Education and Social Work, University of Sussex, UK.
Sorry, I'll organize myself.
Okay, hi everyone. So yes, I'm Padmini, and I'm currently in the third year of a PhD in International Education at the University of Sussex in the UK. Here's my Twitter handle. Got a slight bottle issue there, but there it is. Thank you. In case any of you are tweeting today, and in fact, if you have signal down here, then that's great. So my PhD research focuses on young people's experiences of gender and sexuality in Delhi secondary schools, and today I'm focusing on findings that are about how boys negotiate masculinities and learn to become men at schools in Delhi. So I think it's kind of picking up on some themes we've already been talking about, and hopefully some new perspectives as well. So in this presentation, I'll start off briefly with the rationale and conceptual framework of the study. I'll talk about the research methods that were adopted, and then I'll go on to talk about my findings relating to masculinity. I'm going to break this into three areas. Firstly, how institutional school structures produce and reproduce masculinities. Secondly, how students are agents who are involved in these processes, who shape these processes. And thirdly, other sites of learning that influence understandings of what it is to be a man. And then I'll finish off with some conclusions and recommendations based on these findings. Okay, so the rationale for my study. As we've been kind of talking about today, schools are crucial sites where young people learn about gender and sexuality, both directly and indirectly. Nayak and Kahili have argued that schools are one of the most formative arenas in which young people experience and contribute to the reproduction of social norms. Meanwhile, in last year's Verma Commission here in India, there was a call for schools to act as counter-socializers to tackle gender bias and discrimination. So a key rationale for my study is that in order to understand how schools might become these counter-socializing forces, first we have to understand how young people learn about gender and sexuality at school, and then think about how these processes of learning might inhibit or contribute to transformative action at school. So let's think a bit more specifically about schools and masculinities. So Connell explains in one of her frameworks that we can understand masculinizing processes at schools in two main ways. We can look at these processes and how institutional school structures encourage them. So this could include disciplinary practices or school textbooks, for example, as Madhu was talking about. We can also think about students who are agents who shape this process, and examples of these agencies would be peer cultures at school. So this framework is key to how I'm conceptualizing processes of learning about gender and sexuality at school. And just to briefly mention, other concepts that are shaping my theoretical approach include theories of intersectionality between gender, sexuality, caste and class in India, and also theories that link globalization, gender and youth in the modern Indian context. Okay, sorry, lost the page. Yeah, no, that's good. Oh, there it is, thank you. Well spotted. Right, so this is, talk about my research methods briefly. So last year I spent 5 months carrying out mixed methods research in 3 Delhi secondary schools. There was a private school, a central government school, and a state government school. So I worked with girls and boys in class 11, so they're about 15 to 17 years old, and I also worked with their teachers. The research started with students, 176 of them across the 3 schools, completing questionnaires. Then 34 of these students volunteered to take part in group discussions, which were mixed and single-sex. And then almost all of these students were interviewed individually. I also interviewed 25 teachers, and I carried out participant observation at the schools as well. And I'm happy to talk about those methods later on if any of you are interested. And just to say as well that all the schools and the participants have been anonymized in the interest of confidentiality, and most of the students chose their own pseudonyms, as I think you'll be able to tell from some of their names. Okay, so let's go on to the findings and start with how institutional school structures produced and reproduced masculinity. One of the most notable ways that schools did this was through disciplinary practices which were differentiated according to gender. So a lot of students told me that if girls and boys both did something wrong, for example, not completing their homework on time, it was only the boys who got punished. A lot of students also told me that physical means of punishment, such as beating or slapping, were often used for boys, but hardly ever for girls. And this predominant use of corporal punishment was apparent at all the schools, even though officially such practices are illegal. Perhaps more striking than the prevalence of these practices was the widespread view that corporal punishment is appropriate for boys, as I think this quotation from one of the girls at the state government school suggests. "Ma'am, it's all right. Boys do not even cry when they get slapped. It's a regular thing for them. They even get slapped at home, and they get slapped at school too, so this is not at all bad for them." So the widespread practice and acceptance of physical forms of punishment for boys is an example of schools actively reinforcing these associations between masculinity and violence that we've been talking about. And it's apparent that schools' gendered approach to discipline influence students' attitudes. Both girls and boys express this idea that boys are not only capable of taking physical punishment, but also that this is an appropriate and fair approach to disciplining them. So now let's think about students as agents who produce and reproduce masculinities themselves at school. I wanted to start here with a quotation from one of the boys at the central government school, where he describes one of his friends. "No one can forget his name, never ever. Even someone from 12th class couldn't touch him. He was a strong guy. He was involved in fights. He was something else. When he was intense, he was having a relationship with a girl in 12th. She was the head girl of the school." So Rapper here seems to elevate his friend to almost mythic proportions, and in particular it's this combination of being a fighter and a lover that seems to lead to this idealized masculine identity which elevates him apparently above all others. Boys who enacted these forms of masculinity at school were often referred to as heroes, whether disparagingly by their teachers or admiringly by some of their peers. And this hero masculinity draws on forms that are portrayed, for example, in Bollywood movies. And the fighting to this hero identity suggests that associations between violence and masculinity are important in peer cultures as well as institutional practices at school. However, there were also some boys who talked about being drawn into fights with their peers, even if they didn't want to get involved. These were good boys whose masculine identities were distinct from those of heroes. Good boy masculinity was associated with focusing on studies, concentrating in class, and respecting girls and women. So there seemed to be a conflict between the masculine identities developed and valued in peer cultures and those encouraged by institutional practices at schools. Good boys enacted forms of masculinity that were compliant with schools' academic and disciplinary structures, so they were rewarded through school prizes, class monitor and school prefect positions. On the other hand, boys who enacted hero masculinities were punished for being disruptive in class, for harassing girls, and when physical fights got out of hand. However, a boys will be boys attitude seemed to prevail at all of the schools, and so there was the sense that boys would inevitably behave in these ways, which led to violent behaviour often going unchecked. Additionally, by resorting to physical means of punishment for boys, schools themselves were reinforcing these assumptions that masculinity and violence are inextricably linked. So the last area that I want to talk about is other sites of learning that influence participants' ideas about masculinities. So I've already alluded to the role of Bollywood tropes in young men's lives, and other forms of media also played an important role in the making of men among participants. So as I'm sure most of you are aware, since December 2012, when a young woman was raped and killed in Delhi, there's been widespread media coverage of cases of violence against women, and perhaps inevitably, in light of this media coverage, issues relating to sexual violence and rape were topics often discussed by my participants. So in mixed group discussions, I used images that I found online to help to guide discussions about eve-teasing and sexual harassment. In one of these mixed group discussions at the state government school, one of the boys questioned why these images showed scenes from India and not from other countries. And this next quotation was originally in Hindi, so it's been translated. Why India has been shown here? Why doesn't it show foreigners? You are in India. You have come to see that there are rapists here. What's spread in society? Rape is everywhere. Those 2-3 cases that happened, they got a lot of publicity. So I think the way that Rajendra questions the research here is really interesting. Much of the national and international media coverage of the December 2012 rape case and subsequent cases problematically portrayed rape as an Indian problem, and this was accompanied with much debate as to why this might be the case. Now, Rajendra's objection to my choice of pictures, which apparently portray sexual harassment in an Indian context, may have been based in a defensive reaction to this apparent implication that sexual violence is in fact an Indian problem. Additionally, his questioning of why I, as a westernized Indian woman, had chosen images of Indian women being harassed by Indian men may have been because he objected to the implied assumptions about his own identity as a young Indian man. And there are several similar examples in the research that reflected the difficulties boys faced when attempting to define their own masculine identities in the shadow of widespread media coverage reproducing these negative gender binaries, so men as sexual predators and women as their inevitable victims. Unsurprisingly, good boys at schools openly distance themselves from these negative masculine identities. But boys who enacted the sexual confidence of heroes also struggled with assumptions linking masculine sexuality and sexual violence. One boy who fit the rebellious hero image, and interestingly the only participant who admitted to being sexually experienced, expressed his annoyance at a perception that, in his words, anyone who is interested in sex is treated like a criminal. This suggests, I think, a struggle to define a positive masculine identity and sexuality in light of dominant narratives about sexual violence. Okay, so let's finish with some conclusions. I think that these findings reflect some of the complexities of learning to be a man at school. There are competing lessons being offered by school structures, by peer cultures, and by the media imagery which permeates young people's lives, and so the school space. Links between violence and young men's masculinities seemed to be particularly complex. There were those at school who openly celebrated and others who unwillingly participated in violent peer cultures. Schools were directly reproducing assumptions about masculinity and violence through disciplinary practices, and indirectly by viewing fights among boys as inevitable. Additionally, several boys were clearly struggling to distance themselves from portrayals of male sexual violence in ongoing media coverage, and to define positive masculine sexual identities in light of men as predator narratives. Perhaps most problematically, the schools I worked in were not providing a space for students to talk about gender and sexuality, let alone to critique widespread assumptions and norms, as you talked about, Rebecca. And I think this lack of critical space intensifies confusions, ideas about assumed binaries, and struggles with masculine identities. In order to act as counter-socializing spaces, I feel that schools should enable young people to question and debate these issues. This could happen, for example, through class debates or activities that encourage students to question types of behaviour that are considered appropriate for men and women. At the private school, the school counsellor had just introduced sex education workshops for class 9 and 10 students, and activities and debates like this could be held in such workshops. If the central government school and state government school systems similarly included dedicated members of pastoral staff who worked in this area, it would avoid creating additional burdens upon teachers who have already got plenty of teaching and administrative responsibilities. But teachers are still implicated in the reproduction of social norms at school, and teacher training should include issues such as an equal approach to disciplining girls and boys, as well as practical ways that they can set the same standards of behaviour for students, regardless of gender. So I feel that changing institutional practices in these ways at schools could encourage young men to question and challenge the restrictive masculinities of their peer cultures and those portrayed in the media. While I'm back in Delhi at the moment, I'm going back to the schools where I worked last year, and I'm presenting my findings and recommendations to students, teachers and principals. I'm keen to find out if they think such interventions could work in their schools, and what else they think could be realistically done in order to help schools become these counter-socializing spaces when it comes to gender and sexuality. For now, and obviously in our discussion, I would really welcome any thoughts, comments or questions that you have on the recommendations and findings that I've presented today. Thank you.
Thank you, Padmini. And now I'm inviting Mohammad Abdul Hussain, who is from University of Bangladesh.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. I'm Mohammad Abdul Hussain. I'm from University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. As you can see here, my presentation topic here, the presentation topic is sexual information, masculinities and sexual objectification of women, notions, perceptions and beliefs of male students of Dhaka city. So I'm going to start with my objective of the study. The broader objective of this study was to assess how the source of sexual information affects the development of masculine traits among young men that objectify women's body as a sexual object. And if I divide the broader objective, I'll get 2 points, and the points are to assess how the sources of sexual information affects the masculine traits among young men, and the second one is to assess how young men sexually objectify women's bodies. So I'll describe the background of the study here. Bangladesh is a very conservative country, both religiously and socially, and in Bangladesh we don't have any formal sexual education policy. So the young people of Bangladesh, they get more their information and knowledge, sexual knowledge and information from various informal sources, from adolescent period to young age. The informal sources including peer groups, cousins, senior males, television, internet, pornographic things, cell phone, etc. Supplies them their urge to learn about sexuality, and these information actually give them partial knowledge about sex and sexuality. So this partial knowledge and information give them influences their sexual behavior, and it more or less shapes some attributes of masculinity which are related to the sexuality. And we all know that masculinity have a close relationship with sexuality. Masculine attributes tend to gain the power to control over females, and the ultimate control can be achieved by the controlling of sexuality. So the sexual objectification of women makes them more vulnerable in the society, as we know that women are already in a very vulnerable situation. They are always facing violences, and sexual objectification is also a violence against them. So the sexual this objectification of women's body also led them to severe violence against them. And I was interested to do this research because there was a gang rape on Delhi on bus, and there was also a Mumbai bus rape, and after these incidents there was similar cases happened in Bangladesh, and there was also a gang rape on Manikganj in Bangladesh. So this shows a massive level of cruelty against women, where many young men were involved. So I was questioning why young men are doing this sort of things. Is there any influential things? So actually I'm doing this study till now. I didn't get the analysis fully, but I'm going to show you the data I found till now. So I did this study. It was conducted applying both qualitative and quantitative methods, and I used a questionnaire survey focus group discussions, in-depth interviews, and participant observation. I took 100 respondents for questionnaire survey, and I conducted 5 focus group discussion and 7 in-depth interview. And the sampling method was a simple random sampling, accidental, purposive, and snowball sampling. The area was the Dhaka metropolitan area. So I'm going to show some facts and figures now that I got from the data. I asked a young man what should be the attributes of a real man and what should be the attributes of an ideal woman. So as you can see here, the 31% young man says that to be a real man there should be physical strength, and 27% said that real man should be sexually dominant. And on the other hand, when I asked them what should be the attributes of ideal women, they said that women have to be submissive. 32% men said, and then they have to have patience, shy, caring, homemaker, etc. So then I asked them about what were their source of their sexual information, and 47% men got their sexual information from their friends. Then there are cousins, 27% television, movies, and books. So then I asked them, does pornographic material they got to know about sex motivate them to act in a particular manner? And 78% young men said yes, the pornographic materials motivate them to act in a particular manner. And I asked them about the representation, women's media representation in ICT and media, and is that right? They said that 67% said yes, women's media representation is okay. And when I asked them, do you think women's sensual representation is okay in the media, 63% young men said yes, this is okay. Now I'm gonna show you some responses I got from my FGDs and in-depth interviews. When I was in 5th grade, my friend introduced me with the word sex. The word did not mean much that time, but I knew it was a surreptitious word. My another friend gave me some pornographic stuff in 7th grade, and I loved those things. We used to share things like those a lot on that time, and sometimes we talked dirty things about our female classmates secretly according to those pornographic stuff in our male friend groups. So I got this response from my FGD, and as you can see, the information he got was from pornography, and he tried to objectify his female classmates. And another response was, after my first introduction with sex by some pornographic stories, I was really obsessed with those, and sometimes I fantasized about my neighbor who was elder than me because I read there on those stories. So a man of 20 years old told me that, and my cousin who was few years older than me told me about sex, and also told me women can be used for sexual enjoyment. I have 3 other responses here. I learned about sex from my cousins. They taught me that women are just means of sexual pleasure. As I grew up, I started realizing that they are right. I have seen many women, they are good for nothing rather than having sex with. I got this from my FGD1. And I came to know about sex from my friends at school. They have pornographic books and pictures of men and women having sex. I often used to read these books, and I was really fascinated by the story where a boy has sex with women elder than him. I wish I could have such experiences. A 20-year-old man said that. And I think women are the gifts from God to man. They are sent to please man. It is written in the Holy Book as well. So as you can see, the responses, they are all crucially and violent. They are actually objectifying women. I don't have to explain that. You can see well. And the facts and figures, they also suggest just what our men are thinking in our society. And all this happens because there are no formal sexual information source. in our country, the word sex even is a very conservative to say. We don't we don't say sex in publicly. And finally, I'm showing a chart here how the information are showing here figure that factor influencing informal sexual information leading hegemonic masculinity object of women. We see there informal sexual information promotes and instigates hegemonic traits of masculinity that controls women over their sexuality and use it as a tool to sexually objectify women. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much.
So now we are open for discussion. But first, it's panelists. You have any comments on each of the presentation or anything? If you want to comment. No?
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I really enjoyed all the presentations. Thank you. Just on those quotations there, I mean, yeah, definitely some of them, I think it was apparent that, you know, the way that they were saying, you know, women have been sent for us, used them for sex, that, yes, is clearly sexual objectification. There was at least one that said that after, you know, you saw pornographic materials, it made them want to have sex. So I guess, I mean, are you kind of differentiating between objectification and desire? Because I think it's an important distinction to make, potentially.
The thinking of women as a sexual object is also sexual objectification, I guess. When he is desiring a woman to have sex, then in his mind he is objectifying this woman. So
I guess maybe just because it's obviously possible to have sexual desire without objectifying the person who is, or you know, the idea of having sex doesn't necessarily objectify. So it's just of course it can do as well.
It was only part of the conversation with the whole thing.
Of course, yeah.
I think it's an important thing how we are seeing whole pleasure thing or desire thing is also important. It's not only the objectification, but need to think the pleasure and desire thing is also important because they don't have such information or in anything exposure. They have only these pornographic materials. So we need to think pleasure and desire aspects also.
Okay.
I think confining the woman. Okay. Can I discuss?
Yeah. First, raise your hand, then. I know it's so raise your hand and then more hands. Okay. So first you, then you, then you.
I just wanted to add.
Yeah, please add.
I think the presentation I saw on that basis that merely confining women into a thing of sexual desire. I think that's what actually he meant by objectifying women. I mean, there is distinction between desire and sexual objectification. But only confining women to a mere object of sexual desire, that's I think what I understood from the presentation. He meant that is objectification.
Okay.
My question is Padmini.
Yeah.
I think Delhi have a different sets of school and especially the Delhi government run school, they are mostly for one gender. So whether you find any differences in the answers or major differences between private school and the central school and the government and the state government run school?
Yeah. Should I be taking a few?
Yeah, we are taking them.
Thank you.
Next, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's not a question actually. I'm learning from Jagori, Himachal, and though I'm conducting same sessions as you talked about Dhaka and everything. Same thing is happening in India also. So though we work in very remote areas, so the thing is we didn't talk about this thing conception of masculinity within family, and then this thing how this media is also influencing masculinity. So I think it is very important if we can talk about that also, because now most of the boys, when I go to schools and I talk to them, generally they say because it is happening because it is totally they are influenced by this media and advertisements, and as you said, like, that's the objectification and all that. Yeah, it should also be there, like, in the somewhere, like, we should also talk about that, like, how it is.
Yeah, I mean, I also wonder in context of what you call it, the kind of society that we have, the education for the haves and the education for the have-nots, and the subtle way the masculinity works. So more often than not, the way we look at masculinity in a very negative sense when it comes to the government school, and the way, and whereas the same form of masculinity can be very deeper in the subtle way being portrayed in the so-called private school, and it is more worrying because it also has a very biased sense, nature of entitlement that we talk about. That, you go to any big public school, masculinity is there. Of course, the counselor and other things are there, but then you also the great sense of entitlement, which is again a very cruel kind of masculinity which is being displayed. Whereas here vulnerability is also a very important trait, where being beaten up and all these things. So we need to also examine it from these perspectives as well.
Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for those. My name's Tom Churchard. I run a small project in Swaziland called Waka in Grosso, mentors young boys who grew up without a positive male role model in their life. It kind of ties in Rebecca's presentation and the two on the schools as well in a bit of a comment and a question. We try and create a positive third space at Waka in Swaziland because of the school situation being quite so negative, and because of the difficulty in addressing these issues at home, and which is often the first space, the domestic space, and the school, which is the second space, or the space where they spend most of their time, young boys. They're trying in Swaziland to introduce comprehensive sexual education in schools, but it's coming up with quite a lot of resistance, principally from the teachers a lot of the time, sometimes from parents as well, because of a conservative and taboo sort of fueled society. And so we try and address those issues in a third space that removes them from those like oppressive spaces. Have you come up with any resistance for CSE initiatives in the schools that you worked at? And where did that resistance come from principally? Because it wasn't in our experience in students, and we've had very positive feedback from those initiatives outside of school, but the resistance has actually come from teaching staff, headmasters often, and parents sometimes as well. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I was just curious, Padmini, because your presentation mentioned that you did some work with teachers. So I wanted to know a little bit about that side of the story, and how do teachers really respond to things, what are their attitudes about norms, and do they see that gender construction actually going around in the school, and do they see themselves as being actors in that process?
Okay. Padmini, you have two questions.
Yes, yeah, okay, let's have a look. First, the different school systems question. Yeah, so that's, I should say that the state government school that I worked in was a co-educational school, although, yeah, it's definitely one in a minority in Delhi. I think in terms of differences that I found, I think the differences were more to do with the school structures more than the students themselves. I think that will also relate to who volunteered to participate in my study. They knew that I was English speaking. The more kind of confident students who came forward who spoke English. So I think the cross-section of students that I got maybe went from lower middle class to upper middle class. It was not, huge. So interestingly, a lot of students' experiences were the same in terms of, their access to the internet kind of shows that they watched, that, use of mobile phones. But the way that the systems were different, so in the central government school, I found that the policing of the school space in terms of gender and sexuality was the strictest. There was really they kept an eye on the girls and boys. They didn't let them sit next to each other in class. Girls and boys talking to each other outside the classroom would be separated almost immediately by a teacher. The state government school was perhaps, as you might expect, slightly more chaotic. They didn't have as many teachers involved in discipline. So the peer culture played a much more important role at that school. Students were much more free to kind of do what they wanted. And the private school was kind of a mixture of the two. Teachers were a bit more relaxed, but they were still keeping an eye. And then what was the other? Yeah, education for haves and have-nots. Yeah, I know that the quotations that I provided were from the central government school and the state government school, but the kind of fighting and the romance thing that I talked about, that was also an important form of masculinity in the private school. I mean, I found those kind of masculine cultures to be very similar in all of the schools. I definitely agree that, you know, those forms of entitlement that you mentioned are dangerous, but I think I found this combination of, you know, vulnerable masculinities who got involved in fighting against their will, and the more active, violent masculinities. I saw them in all of the schools, I think. So I definitely agree to, yeah, it's important to pull those apart. And then on the CSE question, yes, that's really interesting, because actually I came into this research interested from a kind of sex education angle. And something that I found is that a lot of teachers actually say, yes, sex education is really important. A lot of students, principals say, yes, we need to learn about these things. But it's the form of sex education that they talk about that is interesting. So I was just talking to a principal the other day where I was saying, you know, what do you think? Students think that they should have sex education. And she was like, yeah, definitely, but sex education has to be combined with moral education. We have to teach them, we have to give them the facts, but we have to tell them to stay in their limits. We have to tell them. So I think that, yeah, the definitions of sex education varied. There was support mostly from everyone, but generally the teachers were saying we need to tell students to stay in their limits. A lot of students were saying we need to learn about our bodies, but a lot of them were also saying we need to learn how to take precautions, the risks of sex. We need to be told why we shouldn't be having sex until we're older. So that was something actually I wasn't expecting.
Can I add one question, small one? Did you see any sexual abuse? I mean, child sexual abuse is very rampant, but none got talked about. Did you see issues there?
I did
in the
not.
preschools?
In the preschools, I didn't see any. It was not something that was openly talked about. One girl alluded to, actually a couple of students in 2 of the schools alluded to male teachers who paid a bit too much attention to the older girls, some of them who liked to maybe like hold them for a little too long, but nothing kind of more was talked about. A few cases were talked about where older male students would kind of touch the younger girls inappropriately, and in one of the schools I was told that, you know, that resulted in him being expelled immediately. Or interestingly, the teacher who told me about this said that he wouldn't have been expelled if it was before the December 2012 case. But after that case, they had to, you know, act in that case. So, yeah. But there's just one more about teachers, should I? Yeah, please, sorry. How do teachers? Yeah, so again, it was mixed. I think it varied. Some teachers, particularly in the state government school, were actually quite relaxed, saying, you know, it's a co-ed school, we should let them mix, it's fine. Again, as I said, in the central government school, teachers were really the ones who were policing this, keeping girls and boys separate. One teacher in that school who'd actually been trained in this adolescence education program, she was very keen that girls and boys shouldn't feel like there's any difference. She actually, in her class, she made them sit alternate girl-boy arrangements to try and make them feel like there was no difference, she said. But after a few days, the principal told her to rearrange them back because there had been complaints from parents. So, yeah, agents and not agents.
Madhu, Rebecca, or Abdul?
I could add on the CSE question. We weren't directly working in schools, but some of the groups that these materials were rolled out through were group schools, and the issue had to do with, I'm sure it's true in other countries, that was mixed ages in the schools. So you might be working in a primary school that has 14, 15, 16-year-olds. So, you know, the curriculum that might be appropriate for the very younger kids might not really focus on condoms and sex as much. So that was an issue that the school was concerned about, specifically condoms and masturbation, were the 2 issues that they had a little bit of problems with. So that was a problem, because you have different you can't really age grade the materials when you have so many different ages in a single lot.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if I can't even see you. Sorry. If you or anyone else in the room has actually done any work looking at the content of the pornographic material that is being consumed. I mean, the reason I ask is because, I mean, even in, let's say, the United States where there is more information about sexuality, we can argue it's clearly not enough in schools. I mean, the research there is showing that the types of video, that like by the time a boy is 16, he's seen 17,000, pornographic videos. And one of the concerns is that, yes, people used to not have information, but now they have actually distorted information, which is, people are now thinking that this is sex and women's bodies do look like this. And I've seen some research done where they actually put pictures and say, well, which of these is a normal woman's body or normal breast, which is a normal penis size, and the children now are totally, they totally overestimate size of everything, because that's now the content that they're deducing from. So I wondered if you had talked at all, or if anyone has really looked at that, because through mobile phones now you can go to the market here, and there's all these little stands where you can download these guys download all these videos. And I just wondered if anyone's doing that work.
Yes.
My name is Benno.
Yes.
Okay. Short cameras behind me. I wanted to provide a response to what she asked. The great project that Rebecca presented on has been scaled up by one of the other projects within Save the Children. And I was saying that the great project has been scaled up by one of the projects within Save the Children. We call it Keep It Real. And the question he asked is really something we've experienced in that project. Some form of resistance being seen with schools. But at a higher level, in Uganda, these materials have to first of all be sanctioned by Ministry of Education before it is passed on to the schools or into the schools. And we started seeing the resistance happening at that level. And they instituted a panel that had to review the materials because we restructured the great materials into a form of a classroom-based curriculum. And they actually advised, the committee had to advise that certain materials were not fit for class. And they were recommended that maybe they had to be removed. But there was a very important observation we kind of made as the children team. One, their review of these materials was not professional oriented. It was pretty much informed by their, they were preoccupied by their conservatism as parents in their own right. Leave alone. So if I was the commissioner, I don't use my position as a commissioner to review these materials, but Benon as a parent, and I don't feel like this should go to schools. Eventually, when these materials go to schools, again we saw resistance from teachers. There were teachers who were comfortable with it, but there were teachers who were like, no, we cannot do this. Two things were happening. Even teachers whom we train and started offering this curriculum to students, they don't do sexuality education to their own kids. So they probably do this. So I think that the levels are different. Now, as to get down to parents who should support the changes beginning to happen to the pupils or to the learners, there is need to find an intervention that reaches parents as well, or reaches the caretakers at home, so that the changes are supported. And so Keep It Real as a project had to now think about how do we reach all these categories of people so that the changes beginning to occur with the pupils are actually supported. But the one observation we've had as a project is that all this takes time. As you start, there is resistance. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, we brought the entire technical team from Ministry of Education to come and appreciate in the field the things that they have approved 2 years ago and what progress has, we've realized so far. And the people who were typically very, very resistant are now beginning to say, so this is a good thing, we have to scale it up to a national level. So I think there is need to start little by little and eventually start to make sense to everybody. Thank you.
Yes.
So I'll just adding what he just talked about. Initially, when we started this program, so it was very difficult. I mean, like, you know, teachers, they didn't accept it. Like, you know, when we said, like, we are going to conduct session on sexuality. So later on, like, you know, then we changed the name and we started calling it body literacy sessions. Somehow we got used to that.
I think it's important to change language according
now,
to them.
Same thing as he is saying, like, you know, now they appreciate and they call us, like, you know, regularly for sessions. And your thing, as you said, like, you know, those porn movies and all that. So generally, like, you know, when we conduct such sessions, I talk about masturbation and so, because, like, you know, it is also very common, as you said, like, you know, there was the internet and all that. So, most of the boys, like, you know, it is very easy to download all those phones because it's easily available. So, like, my this thing was why I'm discussing all these issues, like, because, like, you know, they are not able to concentrate on studies because of this. Their mobile phone is full of porn movies. I checked 2 or 3 phones. So, like, it was all full of porn movies. And then, like, you know, while asking, like, you know, then they themselves speak, like, you know, we are masturbating like 9 to 10 times in a day. And, like, you know, they keep talking about each other. So it is happening, and somehow, like, you know, then I thought, like, you know, what to do and how to take them away from this thing. Then, you know, same thing, like, you know, because this is something like which they get, and they have given names to girls like bomb, and Indian this thing pataka, fuljadi, and so many things are there. So now then I thought, like, you know, what we can do so that, like, you know, we can keep them away from these things. And that is also kind of a, you know, it's a sign of masculinity. If you are having, like, you know, 3-4 girlfriends, then you'll look more masculine, it seems, according to boys. So the thing is, like, you know, when I ask them, like, you know, why do you call them bomb? So they, like, you know, they define the shape. Like a girl with big breasts and big hips, like, you know, she is bomb. So later on we just ask them, like, you know, how your mother and sister looks like, you know, what is her shape. So how do you call your sister? Bomb, come here and give me a glass of water or something like that. So I don't know, like, you know, how it is going to impact, but later on definitely it will make him think, like, you know, if before commenting any girl, what will happen. So this is how we are doing.
Any other question? We have only 1 minute. Okay, so before closing this session, I would like to just make one point. Yeah, it's all important session, but I think how we are seeing whole gender thing, I think we need to see gender transgression also, and how we are seeing a transgender issue in this school system. We have done in Nirantar one study looking at the gender thing. So with 40 children we have done FGD, and they talked about few I think girls and boys talk about that they don't relate their body as a male or female. So whenever we are talking about school, how we are seeing gender transgression, gender as a continuum, and transgender issues, because we talked about masculinity and we know it's a very like loud and very aggressive thing. Whenever we talk about transgender thing or gender transgression, they don't relate masculinity with that. So how we are seeing this is more important. So thank you.